Ads and Sales, a study of advertising and selling from the standpoint of the new principles of scientific management by Herbert Newton Casson. Chapter 2, Efficient Salesmanship. No American can afford to treat salesmanship as a small matter. Why? Because the United States had a salesmanship basis, because only 13 states were gained by war, and all the others were gained by purchase and bargaining. On 5 great historic occasions, Uncle Sam went out with his money in his hand and bought more real estate. In 1803, he bought Louisiana from Napoleon for $15 million. Thomas Jefferson drove the bargain and actually picked up 14 new states at a price of 2.5 cents an acre. That was the greatest real estate transaction known to history. It doubled the size of the United States and gave us a territory which today contains 20 million people. In 1822, James Monroe bought Florida from Spain at a marked-down price of $5 million, less than the value of Flagler's hotels. Then, just after the Civil War, and for no particular purpose, Uncle Sam bought Alaska. He paid $7,200,000 and got plenty of blame for throwing away good money for snowdrifts. For 30 years, Alaska was generally regarded as a bad bargain, and then some half-frozen trapper found the Klondike. Today, Alaska pays for itself in gold about once in every 4 months. Our 4th real estate purchase was the buying of the Philippines. As to just why we did it, no one has ventured to tell, for we first thrashed Spain, and then, to salve her injured feelings, we gave her $20 million for an archipelago off the coast of China. This archipelago had not been advertised. It was not up to date nor serviceable. There was no demand for it. But as almost all other nations own a few antiques, we thought that we could afford a private collection. So we are holding on to our purchase in the hopes that sometime even this Oriental archipelago may, like Alaska, give us a pleasant surprise and prove to be worth the price. Our last purchase, the Panama Canal site, cost us $40 million, very nearly as much as all the others combined. We paid $1 million a mile for a non-existent canal, which proves that Roosevelt was at least not as clever a bargainer as Thomas Jefferson. But we had to have it, and it will, no doubt, be a source of national pride and satisfaction for centuries after its excessive cost is forgotten. So it was buying and selling that gave us half our territory, and it is also a fact, not usually recognized, that salesmanship played an important part in preserving the Union. While it was Lincoln and Grant who put down the rebellion, it was Jay Cooke, the famous banker, who sold the bonds and brought in the money. Jay Cooke was unquestionably the first to launch a national sales campaign. In 1864, he was appointed by Lincoln as sales manager of bonds, at a time when the federal government was at its wits' end for money. At once, Cooke sent out more than 4,000 agents. He established a press bureau, the first in the world, maybe, and he advertised the bonds in every worthwhile paper in the northern states. His fellow bankers were shocked and astounded at his methods, of course. They said he was no financier, nothing but a peddler of patent medicine. But Cooke only laughed at them and sent out another flood of handbills. He had a flaring advertisement hung in every northern post office. Such was his energy that in a few months the North went into a fit of bond madness. After the noise and the shouting were over, it was found that Cooke had sold bonds to the face value of $1,240,000,000. $1,200 million. Such was the result of the first national sales campaign in the United States. If ever there should be a Salesman Hall of Fame, one of the first pedestals must be reserved for J. Cook. There is no doubt that some of the abundant glory that has gone to Grant and Lincoln ought to have gone to this Philadelphia banker salesman. As one editor very fitly said, quote, "The nation owes a debt of gratitude to J. Cook that it cannot discharge, for without his valuable aid the wheels of government might have been seriously entangled." Close quote. The truth is that salesmen have done more for progress and civilization than anyone imagines. They have done more than all the colleges who developed the peasantry of Europe into enterprising American citizens. They have transformed the man with the hoe into the man with the self-binder. They have given us the radiator for the fireplace, the piano for the dulcimer, the automobile for the pushcart, the typewriter for the quill pen. They have put more comforts into the cottage than the king used to have in his palace. How quickly we forget the great sales battles of our own day. Whenever a new commodity appears, we ridicule it and oppose it and refuse to buy it at any price. Then the salesman trains his batteries on us. We fight for a while, and finally we surrender. But we give no credit or glory to the salesman. We walk up to the counter and buy the commodity, remarking to the clerk that it is just exactly what I have needed for the past 20 years. It is not true that new goods are manufactured to supply the demand. There is no demand. Both the demand and the goods have to be manufactured. The public has always held fast to its old-fashioned discomforts until the salesman persuaded it to let go. There was no demand for the railroad, and for years many people believed that 30 miles an hour would stop the circulation of the blood. There was no demand for the steamboat, and when Brunei drove the first boat by steam on the Thames, he became so unpopular that the London hotels refused to give him a room. There was no demand for the sewing machine, and the first sewing machine that Howe put on exhibition was smashed to pieces by a Boston mob. There was no demand for the telegraph, and Morse had to plead and beg before 10 Congresses before he received any attention. There was no demand for the air brake, and Westinghouse was called a fool by every railroad expert because he asserted that he could stop a train with wind. There was no demand for gaslight, and all the candle burners sneered at Murdoch for trying to have a lamp without a wick. There was no demand for the reaper, and McCormick preached his gospel of efficient harvesting for 14 years before he sold his first 100 machines. No, it is not true, as learned theorists have said, that every great invention springs into life because it is demanded by the nation. It springs into life, and nobody wants it. It is the ugly duckling. Everybody prefers 10 cents to it until a few salesmen take it in hand and explain it. When Frederick E. Sickles first exhibited his steam steering gear, now used on all the seas of the world, all the sailors looked upon it with contempt. Nobody seemed to take the slightest interest in it, wrote Sickles. When Charles T. Porter first showed his high-speed engine in England, it was not taken seriously by anyone. My engine, says Porter, was visited by every engineer in England and by a multitude of engine users. And yet, in all that 6 months, not a builder ever said a word about building it, nor a user said a word about using it. I was stupefied with astonishment and distress. When Bell first showed his telephone at the Philadelphia Centennial, it was endorsed by the greatest scientists of America and England. It was tested and proved, but the average man called it a scientific toy and refused to either use it or finance it. Bell preached telephony for a year before the public paid in the first $20 bill. And that was only 36 years ago. And the telephone business of today represents 1,500 millions of capital. There are men now alive who can remember how their mother sat down and cried when the first cook stove came into the house, displacing the clumsy and wasteful fireplace. They can remember their first store boots and store clothes. They can remember the old battles between the teamsters and the men who built the pipelines for petroleum, between the puddlers and the experts who developed the Bessemer processes, and between the news agents and the pioneers who established the first 10-cent magazines. It is a fact of industrial history that the inventor, by himself, seldom succeeds. His work has to be supplemented, 1, by the manufacturer, and 2, by the salesman. Invariably, an inventor is a man of limited mind. He is self-centered. His mind is interested only in its own creations. He is out of touch with the public. His knack is not in selling nor in making money, but in working out some theory or idea of his own. When he has made his working model, his part of the task is done. He must then turn this model over to a manufacturer who will grapple with the second problem of producing it cheaply and in large quantities. Few inventors do this, as they are seldom efficient in any executive line. Many an inventor has come to ruin because he did not and would not recognize this fact of human nature, that an inventor is designed to do his work alone and not in cooperation with 1,000 other men. And finally, when the new article has been perfected and cheaply produced, the manufacturer must step back and make way for the salesman. A third man with a third type of mind is needed in the proper marketing of a new commodity. The salesman cannot invent. His mind is not ingrowing, but outgrowing. He cannot manufacture. Whenever he has tried it, the costs go skyward. But he does know how to interest and convince the public. As a specialist, the salesman is new. Trade used to be so local and so small that there was no chance for a high-class salesman to develop. The man who made the goods was supposed to sell them, and his customers were men who lived nearby, whom he knew as personal friends. Incredible as it seems to us today, it is a fact that before the Civil War, no outside drummer was allowed to sell his goods in Philadelphia, Boston, Louisville, or Pittsburgh. Local merchants claimed and enforced a monopoly. The idea that any American has the right to sell his goods anywhere inside the limits of the United States is new. The country was nearly a century old before it permitted free trade inside its own boundaries. The salesman specialist is so new that no one can set a limit to his influence in the near future. For the first time in history, he has national transportation, national magazines, and a national system of credit. The little local fences are thrown down. For the first time, he is being appreciated and applauded and told to go ahead and do his best. The salesman who fails, surrounded by the unparalleled opportunities and advantages of this day, has no one to blame but himself. End of Chapter 2.